Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is the podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. I had such an awesome guest on the show today. I can't wait to share her with you. So, Firestarter, speaker, author, activator, I love that, and coach, Dixie Gillaspie joined me today. Dixie talked about a lot of things when it came to leadership. What are the 2 or 3 things that leaders need most today? She talked a lot about transforming your identity as a leader, changing your mindset. But I loved her 3 Ps: passion, purpose, presence. You don't want to miss a second of this. Let's get at it. Hey there, everybody. This is Kenny. Welcome back to the Leading from the Middle podcast. I want to jump right in. This is going to be some inspiration for you, but some great advice. And you are just prepared to be inspired. So I want to introduce Firestarter, speaker, author, activator, and coach, Dixie Gillaspie, to the podcast today. Dixie, it is just an honor to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so thrilled to be here. I just know we're going to have a great conversation.
Oh, no doubt. Well, thank you for the time. And I want to start here because what you're doing is so inspiring. And I really would love for the audience to know your backstory. What's your backstory and what has inspired you to do what you've been doing?
Part of the backstory is that everything can inspire me. I think that's one of the brilliant things. You just, when a person is lit up and, passionate, they're living on purpose, inspiration is everywhere. It's so, but I find my inspiration really, I would say 3 places to focus on. One is observing where there is power. And that sounds like I'm looking for where there's the ability to force or manipulate. But you look all around you and you see the inner power of our own, just our own being. And you start to realize that everything has power. Everyone has power. And you just kind of watch that energy. And it's so inspiring to see even the tiniest things. Think about hummingbirds. Think about how much power there is in a hummingbird's ability to migrate thousands of miles and come back to the same place. We moved recently. We bought a house recently and moved. And the hardest thing for me to leave behind were my hummingbird feeders because I knew they'd be back and somebody needed to feed them, right? Yeah. There's power in that. So if you just watch for things like that, you can be so inspired to realize just how much power we really have in our own nature. Story always inspires me, because every story that's about someone else or something else still has so much to teach each one of us. So that's so huge. And then just really watching that, just the creation. It's not even the creativity. I started to say creativity. It's really watching how we continually create and recreate who we think we are, our identity, our outcomes, we're just always creating something that we love. And it always inspires me to see somebody create because they just decided it was a good idea and they would just love to create it. Like, those are the things that inspire me.
Wow. So I love that, it gives me more awareness now that I gotta be looking for the power. I love that.
You're sitting in front of a bookcase. So I just know that you've got just a massive amount of power right at your back.
No doubt. There's no doubt. Before I get into some specifics, please tell us a little bit about your books. Tell us a little bit about your latest one as well.
Yeah. So they're very different. So I came out with Just Blow It Up, which is really a treatise almost, and entreating really people to create what they want to create. I had, most of my client experiences started with, I would say, what do you want to create? What do you want to do? What do you want to be? How do you want to live? You're coming to me not just to change something. You're coming to me because you want to change something into something you really want, right? And people would say, well, what I really want is, fill in the blank. And then within a breath or two, they would say, but I can't because. And they would start identifying all the problems, all the barriers, all the things that are in the way. So the first book was called Just Blow It Up, Firepower for Living an Unlimited Life, because it was really about, every time people would say, but I can't because, it's like they put a brick in the wall. Just another brick in the wall was for real. Like everything that says I can't. And so really unpacking that and just learning to just blow up those walls.
Hmm.
And then I've done quite a bit of writing, but hadn't published another book. But at the same time that I was writing Just Blow It Up, I was also actually writing a fiction book. It's really allegorical spiritual fiction in a way, because it's a fictionalized account of how I came through childhood abuse into a complete love of life and being fully alive.
Wow.
So the household I grew up in basically a cult situation. We weren't a communal cult, but very controlled. And the chance for punishment was high, shall we say.
Mm.
And I had physical and sexual abuse in my childhood experience. And so unpacking the childhood experience, the intervening years of, realizing, oh, hey, I'm one of those people that was a victim. Like I'm a victim. Like that wasn't how I identified, but it was still a label, right?
Hmm.
To the nah, I'm not. I'm not broken. I was never broken. That was an experience, but it's not the truth of who I am. And so the book is called The Truth About Winter. And it's really about the truth of our adversities and the truth of our dark um, our dark places, and just how to come out of that. So that
Wow.
will actually publish. The Kindle version drops Tuesday the 21st, and the paperback will be available 2 weeks later.
Okay. Fantastic. So I'm glad you said it. I'll make sure we post it as well. Um, it seems like a lot of inspiration from a lot of different places. And there was one other thing that really stood out for me that I loved. You say you're allergic to can't. Um, and I hadn't realized that your second book was about you. And so for you to get from there to this place of allergic to can't is amazing. Tell us a little bit about why you came up with that expression. What was the inspiration for that?
Well, I think I was born that way, honestly, Kenny, because even when before I can even remember, the best way to get me to do anything was to tell me I couldn't do it.
Oh.
It's you can't do that because you're not big enough, you're a girl, you're whatever, which is tough when you're growing up in basically a cult situation where the rules are you can't cut your hair and you can't wear it down and you can't wear makeup and you can't wear pants and you can't do all these things because rules. And I'm like, watch me, just watch me. And that's always been my true nature is, I don't really believe in impossible. And I certainly don't believe that somebody else gets to define impossible for me. And then I went through a lot of years where I started accepting those labels. I was a medical management consultant for years and then went into more generalized entrepreneurial consulting and then coaching. And, 30 years of that. And I had people tell me, well, you can't consult outside of medical because you haven't done it. Well, you can't be a coach because your focus has been business. You can't this, you can't that. And I just decided I was just going to own the allergy and just let myself get prickly every time somebody told me can't, because it's that prickle that tells me, oh, there's something that you want and you need to go for it. You need to create it. You need to stop with your beliefs or anybody else and just do it.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, how dare somebody say that? And I love your reaction to it and your response to it. Sounds like it's a reaction first and then it's a response. Hey, you really? Okay. Don't
Yeah,
believe.
that instinctive reaction lets me know.
Yeah,
It kind of puts me on notice, there's something going on.
I love it. I want to take all that now and let's go down the road a little bit of the business leaders. There's something else that you seem pretty passionate about, and that is how business leaders treat their people and react to when someone has a trauma, when someone has a personal trauma. And it sounds like you're very passionate that leaders should not only recognize that, but do some stuff about it. What is your advice to leaders when someone on their team has a personal trauma?
I'm going to take us back even one step before that.
Okay.
Because as leaders, and really as individual humans, we don't know who has trauma, but I guarantee you everyone does, because trauma isn't an event. I mean, I can point to events and say, that was traumatic. And people will say, well, those were the traumatic events in your life. And I will tell you, some of the most traumatic events in my life weren't those events. Every one of us has had the experience of trauma.
Hmm.
So the first thing we need to do as leaders is accept that we have had traumatic experiences. They may not have been events that other people would label as traumatic, but we experienced them as trauma. Therefore, we've experienced traumatic events, right? And then we can accept that everyone that we lead, everyone we interact with, the people that are, that we report to, the people that we have as clients, the people that we have as employees or freelance team members or whatever, the people that are our vendors, every one of them, they have had traumatic experiences. Therefore, we all have triggers. We kind of make it like a trigger means you're helpless to something. You're powerless not to have this knee-jerk reaction to this thing that triggered you.
Hmm.
I don't see triggers that way. We can unhook triggers.
Hmm.
We can unhook triggers. It's the same as, you think of Pavlov's dogs, right? That was a trigger. That
Yes.
was just setting a neurological response. That's a trigger. You can unhook those. But the other thing that has to happen is we have to recognize that when we come into a relationship, that compassion depends on our ability to understand that the other person has had a traumatic experience as well. It doesn't depend on us to know what it was. That's, I think, where leaders get really caught up. I need to know who on my team has traumas and triggers.
Hmm.
No, you don't. You
Hmm.
need to understand that everybody on your team has experienced trauma. Everyone has triggers. Some people may be dealing with it better. Those aren't necessarily your healthiest team members.
Hmm.
Those may be your most at-risk team members.
Hmm. Wow.
And we don't know why people break down. Well, because they've been having to hide it, having to deal with it by not showing it at work until it built up. And then it turned inward or it turned outward.
Hmm.
But quite often we think about mental health, our most at risk look like the healthiest until they don't.
Hmm. Wow. And a lot of leaders miss that, right, Dixie? They just kind of walk past it and then are shocked when then everything spills out and spills over.
Yeah.
Um,
And so often, actually, Kenny, we not only miss it, we want to take advantage of it, right? Here's this person that seems like, I mean, they got shoulders of steel. You can pile everything on them and they're fine. While other people are having their breakdowns or, they're taking their mental health days or whatever. This person, man, they've just always got it together. And
yeah,
so we put more on.
we put more on. That's probably the first person that we ask to pick up an extra shift or to stay later because oh, they're fine. I love that going under the assumption that everyone has trauma is it's so important. One thing that among a lot of things that you give great advice about, I want to get your advice on identity now because I think that I see a lot of leaders struggling with their identity and their brand and how to build that. But you go a couple of extra steps here. You talk about transforming identity and then really having to change your mindset a little bit as you transform your identity. Take us down that road and why that's so important for not just leaders but for all of us.
All of us, identity is always, the identity is what we interact with, as other people. Like I'm interacting to some extent with your identity right now. You're interacting with mine,
Hmm.
but we don't always know that identity is a creation. So this is my working definition of identity, not something you're going to find in a dictionary or validated by science, but it helps. It's meaningful. It works. So I look at identity as it is simply the current way that I understand myself, experience myself, and express myself. So it's my current understanding, experience, and expression of my true self. My true self is much bigger than my identity, but my identity is what I've created to help me understand myself and experience myself and express myself. So we as our true selves, we're creators. You know, we started as pure spirit, we're creators, but we have to have a way to understand ourselves in this limited form. Like we come into a body, into a material world, we're now in a material form, we got to understand that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way that we understand it when we're 5 is not the same we understand it as at 15 or 20 or 25 or, so on and so forth. So we know our identities are not always the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? I certainly don't experience myself and express myself the same way now, even than I did 2 years ago, let alone 10 or 20 or whatever. So when we start to understand that identity is a creation, it starts as an unconscious creation. We don't actually become self-conscious until really develops between the ages of about 4 and 7. Before that, we're totally living in the unconscious. We're not really aware of ourselves as separate as a self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our identity starts to develop as we start to understand ourselves as separate. Like, oh, wait a minute, I'm an individual, unique being in a body that is separate from everything else. I need to understand that. I need to know what that is. And then I'm going to have an experience with that understanding, right? My understanding is going to determine my experience. So if I understand myself as a person who can be told, no, you can't do that, for instance, if I understand myself as a person who has to obey all the rules, I'm going to have a completely different experience and I'm going to have a different expression than if, as I happen to have developed, my identity was I'm a person who gets to question whether or not I'm allowed to do things or able to do things. I'm a person who gets to defy that supposed permission or limitation of my abilities. That was a completely different experience.
Mm-hmm.
My sister and I compare notes. She's 16 years older than I am. So we had completely different, separate experiences. By the time I was 2, she had kids. So, or 4, I guess. But, she had kids of her own. So we go back now and compare experiences raised by the same parents,
Mm-hmm.
completely different choices about how we created our identities, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we first accept that identity can now be created consciously. We created them unconsciously, but we have the power to create them consciously.
Mm-hmm.
So what I see as leaders is we assign identities to people and we say, this is the box, the label, the definition that you're in. And then we continually reward them or at least reinforce. Sometimes it's not a reward. Sometimes we've got a definition for somebody as they're the slacker. They're the person that procrastinates and comes in at the last minute. That's the identity we assign them. But we constantly reinforce that by treating them according to the identity we've assigned. They're going to continue to reinforce that as well. They may be miserable in that identity, but they'll reinforce it because our experiences always reinforce the belief that created the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense? Like we
sense.
just keep creating those experiences.
Yeah.
So as leaders, we do the same. If our identity is tied up in how much external power we have, not the inherent personal power we talked about earlier, but our external power to force, right? To coerce, to punish, to force other people to do things, then that's going to be how we understand and express ourselves. That's then how other people experience us, which it continues to reinforce their identity, probably as being powerless, as being, not able, as not having capability. It's really interesting. I was doing a presentation on identity, and we were talking about how, so many people, their identity is so wrapped up in what they do, or how much money they make doing it, or the title, or all those things, right? And our leadership structure in business reinforces that identity. And somebody said, well, then what do you base your identity on?
Yeah.
And without thinking about it, Kenny, and I could not have gotten away with this 10 years ago. Without thinking about it, I just told the truth. I said, I like to base my identity on how I experience myself as soul, because nobody can take that away from me.
Yeah.
And then I literally took a deep breath. This was right before the pandemic. I took a deep breath. I'm like, I just really said soul in a business conference.
Yeah.
Let's see how people handle that, right? Because that's the side of me that
Yes.
most of my business clients don't see. And what happened told me so much. People, the room had, was set up classroom style with chairs that were on rollers. People literally rolled their chair toward the desk and went, "How do you do that?" Yeah,
Um, yeah, mind blown there. Um, can I ask one follow-up question on this?
please.
Because this is fascinating and it's making so much sense. What if, or have you seen this happen where someone's identity does get stuck at a certain age and are in business, maybe stuck at 2, 3 years ago? I sometimes, my mind is racing back to people in business that I worked with that had a lot of success 3 years ago and then didn't have any more later because they were still doing the same things. But I've also come across, I was speaking to a parent of someone that's in their 20s right now. It's, hey, they kind of got stuck back at 16. And so do you see that? And if so,
It's
what
inevitable. I'm glad that this is such a beautifully phrased question. Kenny, nobody's ever asked me the question that way, and it's beautifully put, because we absolutely do get stuck almost always in a structure or pattern where it was most rewarded or reinforced.
mm,
So, for instance, I was in medical consulting for years, and most of our staff were women, a lot of times young women who had no other professional training other than the industry specific training to be in the medical field. And I would see these behaviors. I'm like, in what world do you think that works at work? You don't, what are you doing?
mhm,
And then I started to realize that what I was seeing was the behavior that, especially because of, you just look at the age group and what was normal in the culture at that time,
mhm,
that they had been rewarded for little girl behavior. They had been rewarded for crying when their feelings got hurt by, whatever. They had been rewarded for putting themselves down and going, "Oh, silly me, I can't do anything right." They'd been reassured and rewarded, and that behavior had been fed, and they got stuck there. This is not because of the person that they are. They were brilliant, beautiful caretakers,
mhm,
amazing people. But under certain circumstances, this identity would show up that I would just be like, where did that come from? You're too smart. You're too good. You're too amazing to be behaving like that. And then I realized it was that identity coming out that got stuck because it got reinforced. The same thing in trauma survivors. And by this kind of trauma, I mean people that the behavior toward them has been chronically and systemically traumatic.
mhm,
They get stuck in the defensive protective identity. So we say, well, how is that ever rewarded? It might have just been rewarded by staying safe.
mhm, mhm.
Just that simple. It wasn't a external reward. The reward was, I feel safer when I behave this way.
Wow.
And they get stuck in that behavioral structure and
Wow.
identity.
Yeah. It's so important that somebody identifies that to help them, through that. So, thank God for people like yourself who openly talk about it, because that it sometimes can, because I mean, the first question that I asked the parent that was telling me, well, what are we going to do about it then? You know what I mean? Are we just going to let him stay, like this? And it was a traumatic event. He had lost his dad, that kind of had him, stuck there. This is amazing. All right, I got to get to passion, purpose, and presence, and because again, I think this has to do with branding and how I see a lot of leaders struggle with that. But the way you break it down is so thoughtful. Please break that down for us: passion, purpose, and presence.
Presence is that expression part of our identity, right?
Yeah.
So really the passion of purpose in a way connects back to be saying, I really want my identity to be based on how I experience myself as soul. And soul may not be everybody's expression for it. You know, it might be spirit, it might be, you know, my true self, my most authentic self. But there's a self that is pure and authentic that isn't the identity. It's greater than the identity. So let's start by just thinking of identity as a kaleidoscope. Everything's in there, right? But the picture that you see depends on how you turn it. So think about how you express yourself, kind of like that kaleidoscope. How
Hmm.
you express yourself, your presence in the world, is that picture that you're showing other people in the kaleidoscope. Okay.
Hmm.
So we create presence, not just by like, we're present. You and I are like present right now. So
Right.
our presence is showing up. But for the people watching, we're not in their presence. You know,
Hmm.
it's a replay, it's a recording, but this is still our presence.
Hmm.
The books that I write are still my presence, even though, you know, people might read them after I'm dead. I will be present in the world,
Hmm.
and it's still my presence. So it's that picture that we show people that's the output of our identity, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Absolutely.
The way that we connect our passion and purpose to it, to me, is how we get to that most authentic core of ourselves. Passion, you know, people say, I need to figure out what I'm passionate about. I'm like, just can you just accept that you are passionate? That passion came pre-installed, right? It's not an option we choose later in life.
Mhm.
It came pre-installed. I think of it like my inner flame, right? Like I've got an inner flame that either gets turned up or gets turned down. It's when I'm on purpose, when I'm living what we call my true nature and purpose, that flame goes whoosh, right? I'm on fire. I'm lit up from within, and nothing can stop that. I've got all the energy I need to do anything. When I'm not on purpose, when I'm not living my true purpose, then my energy goes down, my inner light gets dim, and my passion is flatlined.
Mm. Mm.
Right? So the purpose, like this is really one of the things that I do in my work, because people want to think, well, I was assigned a purpose. You know, I need to find this purpose. Like it was assigned and then hid like an Easter egg, and they need to go look for it. Right? I'm like, you know, that's actually not how we're assigned purpose. The way that I engage with my purpose is basically understanding. This is my own understanding of my experience. I don't ask anybody else to have the same experience, but I can only share mine, right? That I came into this world from a being that was not in a body to a being that is in a body, and that true self that is was not in a body is part of everything. I don't need an external divine source to assign. I choose what is divine because when I chose it, I was consciously aware that I was part of it.
Mm.
So people talk about they want to get in alignment with divine will or God's will or their will or whatever. I'm like, just step into your authentic self and choose from your heart, because that's never out of alignment with what you came here to do. It can't be. I mean, that's just how it's structured, right? You came into the world from being aware that you were part of everything. Whatever you chose at that time, that choice still lives in your heart, in your, you know, in your soul, in that level of consciousness, what I call the superconscious. Um, just listen to that. Just respond to that. But if you want clues about whether or not you're on the course of listening to that, pay attention to that fire that is passion. Because when you're on purpose, that fire will tell you you're on purpose. And when you're not on purpose, that fire will tell you, yeah, that's not it anymore.
Wow. Wow. I love that. So I knew that there was something behind Firestarter and Activator. You just hit it. And going through that, certainly you'll get to that branding thing that a lot of people search for. This has been amazing. I've got one more question for you, and then actually one more after that. But what is a super creator?
A super creator is somebody who is living out of that authentic self, soul self, super conscious self, whatever label we want to put on it, but they're living out of an orientation, understanding, and experience of being more than just this limited embodied self.
Mhm.
And they're living with the truth that we can create anything we choose. If you can choose it, really choose it, not just, oh, I think, but really choose it, you can create it.
Wow. Or in your case, just tell you, hey, you can't do it.
That was, I don't even function out of that anymore. It's really interesting because once I started saying I get to choose, I realized that a lot of things I was very determinedly creating were because I chose not to let anybody tell me what I could choose. It wasn't even what my heart really desired. And
Yes.
so I started channeling all my energy to only creating what was in my heart.
Yeah.
And I have so much energy for that now because somebody tells me can't and I don't want to do it. I say, can't, won't, don't care. It's not what I choose.
I love it. I love it. Dixie, this has been fascinating, and what great advice you have for all people, not just leaders, but I know our leaders will definitely take a lot from this. Um, and so I'll post it all over the place. But how can people get in touch with you?
Well, thank you for posting it and just thank you for such a fabulous conversation. Easiest way to get a hold of me actually is really and I'm pretty open. You can always just email me and it's super easy because it's my name at Gmail. Just I in nothing hard to remember. Dixie Gillaspie at Gmail. And if you really want to drop me an email and have a conversation, I'm open to that. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn if you want to just follow along. And then you can go to returntoyourpower.com, read a little more, and there is an ebook there called 5 Reasons Your Inner Work Didn't Work the Way You Thought It Would.
Yeah, I saw
That's
that.
probably going to blow your mind and be completely like revolutionary. But go grab that.
Wow, wow, awesome, awesome, Dixie. God bless you. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Continue to do it. It is just it's fascinating work. It is you're a fire starter and activator, man. I could I saw that before you and I started talking, and I certainly feel it even more now. But thank you so much for your time today, and we'll be in contact.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you.
Awesome.